Yet another warning coming out from the federal government about cybersecurity. And this one is based on what's been happening in Ukraine. So we're going to talk about that situation, the whole cybersecurity over there, and why it's coming here. CISA is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. How's that for a name? It's not as bad as, what is that, S.H.I.E.L.D, right, over from the Marvel universe. But the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is the agency that was created to not just protect federal government systems, although they are providing information for people who protect those systems, but also for businesses and you and me in our homes. So they keep an eye on what's happening, what the various companies out there are finding, because most of the cybersecurity information that we get is from private companies, and they kind of put it all together, put it in a nice little wrapping paper. In fact, you can go onto their website anytime that you'd like to and find all kinds of stuff that is going to help you out. They've got a ton of documents that you can download for free, little steps that you can take. It's at CISA.gov, CISA.gov. And they've got the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. That's something that we keep up to date on to help make sure our clients are staying ahead of the game. They've also got their review board, securing public gatherings. They also run the ransomware.gov site that you might want to check out. And we'll be talking a little bit more about ransomware and the ways to protect yourself a little later. Now, CISA is interesting too, because when they are releasing information, most Americans really aren't aware that they even exist. They do, and they've got a big warning for us this week. There's a site that I follow called Bleeping Computer that you might want to keep an eye on, and they have a report just out this week that Ukraine government agencies and corporate entities were being attacked. This was a coordinated cyber attack last Friday, a week ago, where websites were defaced, data wiping malware was deployed, and causing all of these systems to become not just corrupt, but some of these Windows devices to be completely inoperable. Now, that is a bad thing. The reason for this is speculation, but it isn't a whole lot of speculation, right? I'm not getting out on a limb here particularly. But the whole idea behind this is a cyber war that Russia's got, what is it now, 130,000 troops, whatever it is, over 100,000 on the border of Ukraine. They invaded Ukraine a few years ago. Russians shot down a passenger airline in Ukrainian airspace. That was a few years back. They've been doing all kinds of nastiness to those poor Ukrainians. They also had a massive ransomware attack in Ukraine that was aimed at their tax software. Some countries do the electronic filing thing a lot differently than the U.S. does. A couple of examples are Ukraine. France is another one that comes to mind. We have clients in France that we've had to help with cybersecurity. And we're always getting pop-ups about major security problems in the tax software because they have to use this software that's provided by the French government. Ukraine's kind of the same way. The biggest company providing the tax filing software for Ukraine was hacked, and they used that hack to then get into the tax software and make it so that when that software was run by these Ukrainian companies, they would get ransomware. It was really rather nasty. So the Russians have been playing games over in Ukraine for quite a while. But what's apparently happened now is that same things are coming our way. Now, it's not just because of the fact that Ukraine is being threatened. Maybe they're going to encroach even more, take more than Crimea, which they did last time. But we're in the U.S., and what are we doing? President Biden's been sending troops to Europe, troops to Poland, Germany, and also advisors to the Ukraine. He's removed the embassy staff, at least the vast majority of it, from Ukraine. And I think back to what happened with his completely unplanned withdrawal that we did in Afghanistan and how things just got really bad there. And I'm worried about what's going to happen in Ukraine, because the Russians aren't particularly fond of the idea that we are sending aid and support to Ukraine. Yeah, it's a bad thing. President Obama sent them blankets, but Biden is sending them military weapons and ordnance, which is what they need to fight. So Russia has shown that they will attack a country via electronic means, cyber means, right? Cyber attacks. And so what's happening now is the bad guys from Russia that have been defacing websites and who have been doing more than that, wiping computers and making them completely unusable, could well come after us, because they're really going to be upset with what's happening now. Now, CNN has reported the Ukrainian IT services company that helped develop many of these sites was also a victim. And, of course, that means, bottom line, that this is what's called a supply chain attack. What I mentioned earlier with the Ukrainian tax software, that's a supply chain attack, where you are buying that software or you're mandated to use this software to file your taxes by the government. And what happens? Well, it turns out that software is contaminated. That's called a supply chain attack. Now, Ukraine issued a press release about a week ago saying that the entities were hit by both attacks, leading them to believe that they were coordinated. This is a quote here. Thus, it can be argued with high probability that the interface of websites of attacked government agencies and destruction of data by Viper are part of a cyber attack aimed at causing as much damage to the infrastructure of state electronic resource. That's from the Ukrainian government. Not the best English, but their English is much better than my Ukrainian or Russian. So Ukraine is blaming these attacks on Russia. In comes CISA. CISA is now urging business people in the U.S. and other organizations to take some specific steps. So, quote here from the CISA Insights Bulletin. The CISA Insights is intended to ensure that senior leaders at the top of every organization are aware of the cyber risks and take urgent near-term steps to reduce the likelihood and impact of a potentially damaging compromise. All organizations, regardless of the sector or side, should immediately implement the steps outlined below. So here's the steps, and there are a lot of them. What I'm going to do, these you should find in your newsletter today. Hopefully that all made it in there. But three basic things. One, reduce the likelihood of a damaging cyber intrusion. And we're going to talk about the best way to do backups here a little later on today. Make sure your software is up to date. Make sure your organization's IT personnel disabled all ports and protocols not essential for business purposes. This is all basic stuff, but I got to say, I bet you 98% of businesses and organizations haven't done these things. The next major category here, take steps to quickly detect a potential intrusion and then ultimately maximize the organization's resilience to destructive cyber incident. So that means doing things like testing your backup procedure, make sure your data can be restored rapidly, or you have a way to get your business back online quickly. What we tend to do is, in our backup strategy, depending on how much the company can afford to be down, to be out of business if they lose all of their stuff versus what it costs to do this. But we will put a server on site at the company, and that server then does some of the backups, right? It does all of the initial backups. And then what happens is it gets relayed to us. It gets pushed to tape. Tape is really good. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But the other big thing is the backup that we have local to their business also has what's called a virtual machine infrastructure built on it. So if a machine goes down, if it gets wiped, or if it just crashes and can't be recovered easily, we can spin up that machine, a copy of it, in our little virtual environment in just a matter of minutes. So these are all things you should be considering. If you're interested, you can send an email to me at craigpeterson.com. I can send you a checklist that's a little more extensive than this, or I can help you with any other questions you have. I get lots of questions every week from everything from retirees wondering what they should do, all the way through businesses that we help, government contractors and others. All right. This isn't good. Russia is likely coming after us based on this. Visit me online, craigpeterson.com, or email me at craigpeterson.com with your questions. With all of this talk about hackers, ransomware, data wiping systems, what's the best way to protect yourself? What do you do to really protect against ransomware? I can tell you it's not just plugging another hard disk in to do backups. We have a lot of problems nowadays. We've got so many hackers out there. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry to go after us. It's just depressing, really, when you think about it. I think about the old days where security wasn't a huge concern, right? You'd have physical security. I had one of my first jobs was at a bank, and this was way back in the, it would have been the mid-70s, and I was one of the operators of the mainframe. And so as the mainframe operator, we'd load up the tapes and we would ship them places. We'd also go ahead and put them in the vault so that they were in a fireproof vault and we could recover anything we needed to recover. It worked out pretty darn well, and it was a fun job, but most of the time it was cleaning the tape drive heads and taking those tapes, those big round tapes, you might remember those 9-track tapes, and maybe the fancy stuff, 5250 BPI or 800 BPI at one end or the other, the spectrum. And we just had to make sure they were physically safe. Nowadays, of course, mainframes are still around and are still absolutely fantastic. They're just phenomenal, some of the technology IBM has in their mainframes. But most of us aren't using those. Most of us are using a regular computer. I'm sitting in front of a Mac right now that I use for the radio show. We have Windows computers, Linux machines, right? All of those things that we have in our business and that we maintain securely for our clients. But what do you do when we're talking about You can cross your fingers and hope that you don't get ransomed. That sort of practice doesn't usually work out too well for people. But you can do backups, and many people do. So let's talk about the backups. Let's say that you have your computer and you're doing a backup and you have 1 or 2 generations worth of backups for your computer. Ransomware nowadays does not just typically destroy a whole disk. Usually what it does is it encrypts files like doc files, docx, right? Excel files, all kinds of files it thinks might be useful to you. And then, of course, the rest pops up, says, pay me, and off you go. The reason for that is so your computer still works, so that you can enter in the decryption code once you've paid the ransom. Hopefully it works for you. Give or take 50% of the time, you will get your data back if you pay the ransom. Much of the time you won't. But let's go back to that 1 or 2 generations of backup. You're using a cloud service, let's say, and your computer gets ransomware. The cloud service backup software will still work. What if it's working? So you're now backing up your encrypted files to the backup site in the cloud. Do you see where I'm going with this? Your backup's no good. Same thing is true if you're backing up to a local hard disk. Many people do it, and it's handy. I recommend that you do that, but it's not all you should do. So that disk is attached. We had who was it here? Yeah, we have a client in Maine, and they have a really smart system administrator, and he designed these disk drives that would physically disconnect themselves from a machine when the backup was not running and would physically connect themselves when the backup was running. So the idea there was, okay, great, we got a local backup on a local disk, and if the bad guys manage to get a hold of the machine, they're not going to be able to encrypt the backup, as long as the backup isn't running. I thought this was a brilliant solution. Doesn't solve some problems, but it certainly takes care of some others. So if you are doing a backup, you've got to make sure you've got multi-generations. I tend to keep a year's worth. Now, there's other considerations. There's the Federal Rules of Civil Procedures that say you have to have backups. They have to go back years. And there are also other things. The payment card industry requires certain types of backups. If you are a government contractor, we have them as clients, and they have certain data retention policies based on the length of the contract. They have to keep it for some years afterwards. It goes on and on. So if your data is lost or stolen or encrypted and your backup is encrypted or deleted, you are in real trouble, depending on the type of business you're in. So what's the right answer to this? Well, I've talked about 3-2-1 backup for a long time, and it's still a very good methodology for doing backups. But nowadays, they're talking about 3-2-1-1 backup, which is, again, that's a bit of a different methodology in doing backups. But the idea is you've got multiple copies of your data on multiple types of media in multiple places. That's the bottom line. What is the gold standard for this? It's something that gets to be a little expensive. Again, we have another client that we've had for years, and they are looking for a replacement for the backup system they've had. And so we proposed something that's based on what's called LTO technology, which is a type of a tape drive. It's a small cassette, right? It's not those big 12-inch reels of tape that we used to lug around. And it's amazingly dense. The new LTO tape drives have space on them for as much as 45 terabytes of information. It's also great because it's encrypted by hardware, government level encryption automatically. And those tapes can be taken offline. You can take the tape home. Now, we picked up a client who had been doing backups, and they were using little USB drives, and every day he'd take the drive home and bring in the next drive. So he had 5 drives, right? So he had the drive for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he was taking them home. But he missed one of the key things to check: the backup. He hadn't checked the backup, and their backup had not been running for more than a year and a half. So that's the other thing you have to do. The LTO tapes are really the gold standard. It goes back to that for one of the first jobs of mine, right? That job I mentioned where I was mounting tapes and filing them and moving them around and mounting disc packs and pulling them out and everything. Yeah, it still makes sense. They'll last for decades. They cannot be hacked because they are literally offline. You can ship them to places to have them stored. I have a course on backups And if you're really interested, send me an email to me@craigpeterson.com, and I'll go ahead and send you a link to the course so you can watch it. But yeah, I think this is really important. Of course, I'm not going to charge you for that. But magnetic tape, it's established, it's understood, it's proven, it's been around for many decades, and LTO tape is unique. It meets all 5 best practices for addressing ransomware. You might even be able to recover. If you want more information, just email me at craigpeterson.com or sign up for my free newsletter, craigpeterson.com. Switching from gasoline-powered engines to these new electric cars is no environmental panacea. At least that's what West Virginia University is saying, and the EU just changed its mind as well. Ford, of course, about a year ago unveiled its new electric F-150, the Lightning. And Ford has stopped taking orders for them because they are going to have to make double what they thought they would have to make. Ford also has a similar problem with yet another electric vehicle, the Mustang. GM is doing a few different electric vehicles, and so is everybody else, frankly. Porsche even now has an electric car out. That is all well and good, isn't it? And there's certainly problems, particularly with manufacturing nowadays, trying to get the CPUs and other electronic components you need. They're even having trouble getting electric motors for electric windows in vehicles now. They're coming crank window with a little coupon saying later on we'll convert it to electric for you. All kinds of problems. But there's one that I haven't heard anybody but myself talk about. And so I was online looking around, doing some searches, seeing if I was like the only one. There's no way, right? I'm not the smartest person in the world. I don't pay the most attention to everything. And I found that West Virginia University is in total agreement with that, with me. It's just amazing here. They looked at recent trends and they're cautioning, as I have been for years, at least a decade now, they're cautioning about what seems to be a race to put more electric vehicles on the road. And the problem is that these electric vehicles and their demand for electricity may well outrun what's needed to keep the vehicles on the road. So here's a quote from them. The electric grid will struggle to handle the quick charging of very many electric vehicles at the same time. Yeah, by the way, like hardly any. Quick charging is generally what everyone thinks about, like going to the gas station, getting a full charge in 10 to 15 minutes, which would be a tremendous instantaneous load on the local distribution system. My concern is the huge power dumps required at quick charging stations along the interstates. It sounds good, but it'll require a lot of new infrastructure to get the power to the charging stations, as well as building those charging stations. So where does the power come from? Power storage is going to be required if we're going to also move towards fickle power sources such as solar and wind. We do not have power storage capability yet in large enough quantities to do this on a large scale. Solar does not work at night. The wind doesn't blow all of the time. Also, we do not have the distribution on the streets to move fast charging into residential neighborhoods en masse. Electric vehicles are great, but we have not fully considered the impact it'll have on our electrical grid infrastructure. It'll require a lot of expansion of our electrical distribution and charging facilities. Remember, electric power comes from the power company. I heard an interview with a lady the other day, and they asked her, where does the electricity come? She said, well, from the plug in the wall, right? We must consider this when considering wide-scale electric vehicle adoption. Much as there is to gain from electric vehicles, I don't believe we're ready yet as a society for completely electrical vehicle transportation system. With time and infrastructure development, we can be. Totally agree. This is Rory Nutter, professor, Lane Department of Computer Science, Electrical Engineering, Benjamin M. Slater College of Engineering and Mineral Resources. I totally agree with that. We don't have the ability to generate the electricity. We don't have the ability to store the excess electricity. So in other words, if we're using solar at nighttime, we don't have the sun. We can't run solar. So we got to store the solar. And in fact, we have to make about twice as much electricity as we need during the day so that if we can store it, we can then use it at night. The same thing with wind, right? It's fickle. It just doesn't work that well. So what do we need? Basically, right now, we need to stop turning off our coal-powered plants, our natural gas plants, and our nuclear plants, because we need to still have electricity. Look at what's happened last year and this year over in Europe with the crazy cutbacks that they've been doing on some of these plants. Coal nowadays, with the scrubbers that are on our coal-powered plants, is clean energy. It's not like the old days where you lived on the south side of the tracks and you got all of the wind blowing towards you that had all of that nasty coal dust. Have you ever seen any of those pictures? It was just terrible, all of that nasty soot coming. It's not something we need to worry about nowadays. The other big thing that ties into all of this is, so how do we generate our electricity cleanly, 100% cleanly? Nothing's 100%. But just a couple of weeks ago, the European Commission presented their 27 member states with new draft rules that classified natural gas and nuclear power as green fuels for electricity generation. Listen, if we want electric cars, which, as we've talked about before, are highly polluting, yes, because of the materials in them, because of the materials that go into the batteries, having to mine it, having to ship it, having to process it, and then having to change out those battery packs after 80,000 or 100,000 miles. Did you see this guy? There was a meme and a video about this online a few weeks ago. Had a Tesla. His Tesla needed a battery replacement. It would cost him, I can't remember what it was, $20,000, $30,000, a lot of money. So he decided to just blow up the car. That's all it took. I saw another Tesla that had water damage from being down in New Orleans or somewhere. Flooding occurred. And the guy bought that Tesla because Tesla won't sell the parts to fix the car after the water damage. And so he ripped out the batteries, ripped out the electric motors, and he bought a high-power engine, gasoline, and put it into the Tesla. It made really quite a very cool car. You can find it online if you want to look for that. It's quite cool what they ended up doing. It took quite a while to do it, but they did it. So now that we're seeing that nuclear is green, let's talk about why we've been so afraid of nuclear. One of the biggest problems, of course, is so what do you do with all of the waste? And that's a legitimate question. But what you're really talking about when you ask that question are the reactors that went online 50 years ago or that were approved 50 years ago. Because of the regulations, there are these nuclear plants that have been provisioned in the last 20 years that are still using that old technology. So when we get back, we're going to talk about this more. What about the waste? What are fourth generation nuclear power plants? How safe are they? When they say they're intrinsically safe, what does that mean, and how and why? Because I'm predicting at this point that we're going to have to switch back to nuclear. And even the European Union, if you can believe it, agrees with me. Hey, make sure you take a minute, go online, craigpeterson.com, subscribe to my free newsletter. You can get it right there. I send you out stuff every week. And this week is no exception. We've got a bunch of bullet points that if you are in a business position, you got to protect yourself immediately. So I tell you how. craigpeterson.com. So what are these new rules for nuclear energy, and why is it absolutely necessary that we do something like this, get fourth-generation nuclear online, if we can even consider electric vehicles on our roads? Things have changed in the European Union. They've been trying to figure out how they're going to handle all of these electric vehicles, how they're going to properly handle all of the solar cells and the wind turbines. And there's even some work over in the EU to get the tide to generate electricity. Some very cool stuff, actually, that's being done. I love tech, and I'm into all of this stuff, frankly. I think we should be doing a lot of it. What I don't think we should be doing is getting ahead of ourselves. And unfortunately, that's really what's been going on. We don't have a grid that can really use the electricity that we can generate from our windmills, from our solar cells, from anything, frankly. And we cannot take all of that electricity that we might be generating and somehow have that electricity be stored and used, distributed appropriately to our charging stations. You know, our grid was built and designed to have a few central point where electricity is made, where it's generated, and then distributed to some pretty specific types of things like housing developments, businesses, etc. You can't just go ahead and open a big business manufacturing in a residential area, and part of the reason for that is the grid isn't set up for it. You don't have three-phase power going into residential areas, or even more than that. You don't have the high voltage, the high current, etc. So how are you going to be able to quick charge electric cars in the regular residential neighborhoods? How about at a hotel? Yeah, okay, a hotel is probably running multiple phases and has a fair amount of power there. But the amount of strain that's put on the grid by trying to just rapid charge a single car is huge. So how can we deal with that as well? The quickest and easiest way to deal with it is just put more large power plants online. Some people don't like that idea at all, frankly. But we're not ready yet. What are we going to do? Look at what happened in Texas with a fairly minor reliance, I should say, on these windmills last winter. And things this winter, as cold as it's been, that could really cause some just incredible problems. Well, nuclear is being reconsidered, particularly fourth-generation nuclear power plants. The greenhouse gas emissions from nuclear power are 1/700th of those of coal. The nuclear power plants produce 1/400th greenhouse gas emissions of a gas plant, and they produce a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions from solar. Now you're saying, hey, Craig, come on, I get it. Wait a minute, solar. How can solar produce greenhouse gas? It does. And it produces greenhouse gases because of the manufacturing processes, as well as, of course, it off gases. So how do we make all of this stuff work? We all saw the China syndrome, and we heard from experts like Jane Fonda how we would all die if we put in nuclear power plants. These are intrinsically safe power plants, much different than they used to be. Nuclear power, frankly, is a much safer business than most people think it is. They no longer, these new plants, produce the nastiest, what's called high-level nuclear waste. They can reprocess it right there in the plant. They can start, in fact, with some of the nuclear waste that has been generated from the older nuclear plants and get rid of that. It's amazing. So people are asking, okay, plutonium might have a half-life of 24,000 years, but it doesn't emit much radiation. We get that. How about the higher levels of radiation? Because some of it can last for hundreds of thousands of years. According to the U.S. radiation expert Robert Gale, for every terawatt hour of electricity produced, nuclear energy is 10 to 100 times safer than coal or gas. What it does emit are alpha particles, which do not even penetrate human skin. They've done all kinds of risk assessments and tried to figure out what's going to happen, what can we do. And I'm not going to get into all the details here, but it is intrinsically safe because what really happens is that these new plants, these fourth generation and newer plants, are, instead of using water, for instance, the CANDU reactors out of Canada use heavy water in order to cool those rods, the same sort of thing we've had in the meltdowns before. They're using a liquid silica inside them. They're set up in such a way that they do not need to have pumps running. So the Fukushima reactor that you might remember in Japan that failed because of the tsunami, and the fact, this is what was their killer, that their electrical generation from the diesel generators went offline. Why did it go offline? Well, I can see the grid going offline, but how about a diesel generator? If you have it below sea level and the water comes in, you're in big trouble. Now, they didn't have it like permanently below sea level in Fukushima. But when that tsunami wave came in, it was below sea level. They just, man, we could talk for a long time about the problems that they had over there. The nepotism, the lying on the forums. The fact they did not do the upgrades that the manufacturer has suggested, on and on. So these new reactors can lose all power and you won't have a China syndrome. They won't go through a meltdown. And they're even designed in such a way using physics, things called the law of gravity. Who would have thought, right? So that what happens in the worst case scenario is no one gets hurt. It just eats in on itself and then stops, runs out of power. So we got to remember all of this stuff, okay? The nuclear power of yesteryear is not the nuclear power of today. And the nuclear power of today is so green and so safe that even the European Commission presented new draft rules that said that natural gas, nuclear power are green fuels for electricity generation. So assuming the rules are approved and France is in favor, Germany isn't as into nuclear power. In fact, they plan on having all of their plants shut off by the end of 2025, which is crazy because they're already having serious problems with their solar and wind, and that's why they're buying so much natural gas now from Russia. Yeah, American influence dropping over there. Thank you again, President Biden, for allowing that pipeline to go through. All right. Anyhow, they're assuming they're approved. Germany apparently isn't likely to try and block these rules. It means that nuclear, the new nuclear, fourth generation or newer, is going to be right there alongside renewables like wind and solar on the list of the EU's technology that are approved for financial support. Now, this is very good news because, as I mentioned earlier, what happens when it comes to solar at nighttime? Doesn't work. Solar when it's raining? Doesn't work. Solar when it's snowing? Doesn't work. Solar when it's cloudy? Doesn't work. Right? How about the windmills? When the wind isn't blowing, they don't work. When they break down, which happens a lot due to mechanical failures, they don't work. So having these new nuclear plants that are intrinsically safe, that don't generate this really nasty radiation and stuff that we have to store for 1,000 years, etc., the high-level nuclear waste, makes a lot of sense. Because unlike these solar plants or other things that might be on someone's house that cannot be easily controlled by the central grid. In other words, hey, stop generating electricity because I got enough right now. And what Germany's been doing is putting it into heat sinks, heating up lakes and other things to get rid of that extra solar energy people are generating on their homes and businesses. What you can do is, hey, we are at the point where we don't have enough sun. It's really cold. People are trying to heat their homes, or it's really hot. People are trying to cool their homes, and yet it's raining heavily, or there's a lot of clouds. So all you have to do at that point is turn up that nuclear power plant or multiple plants. You see, the way it's going, you're not going to have some massive plant with a bunch of reactors. No. Where they're going with this is to have community reactors in the multi-megawatt range that can be put into communities and the power distributed directly into the community. And these power plants are good for 20 years. And these new ones, they are typically going to be buried in the ground. And then every 20 years, they get dug up, put onto a truck, shipped off, they get recharged, brought back, and you're off and running again. A whole different concept, and I love it. We're starting to do this in the United States. We've got some early approvals for some of these, and I was shocked and amazed and happy that the Biden administration has decided to approve the new nuclear here in the United States. So there'll be some test plants going online relatively soon. That just makes so much sense. These 50-year-old nuclear regulations and plants, they just don't work. Make sure you visit me online, craigpeterson.com. I'm going to have a lot of stuff for you every week. craigpeterson.com. I hope weekend's going well for you. There's lots of fun stuff to do, and it's fun getting out of the house, isn't it? Getting out, going around. There's an outlet store close by where I live, and it's one of these outdoor outlet things, and it was fun just walking around, enjoying a little bit of fresh air, no matter what the weather is. I even enjoy going up there when there's some snow on the ground, because again, it's it's fun. It's a little bit of a change, which is nice. That's part of what I love about living in the Northeast. You really get all four seasons, and they can be really nice. Black Friday, of course, came and went. It was not a bad Black Friday. But one of the questions I've been asked all week long, all month long, frankly, has to do with when should I buy? What should I buy? What are the deals? And it is weird this year. Let me tell you, really weird. And the reason I say that is I did my show prep, and I spent some hours just looking on different websites and looking at opinion pieces, looking at news sources, just trying to find, okay, what's going on? What's the real word out there? Are items as rare as everybody seems to be saying they are? Or is it easy enough to find? That's what we're going to talk about right now. Really, we've had a very turbulent 2 years for retail. Every branch of retail, whatever it is. It's been terrible. So many people have lost their businesses. So many small businesses, small retail, restaurants, some restaurants that I enjoy and just haven't been to in years, really, gone. Completely gone, which is such a crying shame. And a lot of people have put a lot of the blame for the general retail malaise on Amazon and Walmart. Because, again, I had a discussion just this last weekend with a friend's father, and he was saying, well, I've been a biologist in pharmacology for years, and this is just science. It's all science, talking about the lockdown. And so I pointed out how, let me see, I got family from Canada. They cannot drive across the border because of the lockdown. But in the States, they won't let them fly in. But they are drive in, I should say, but they will let them fly in. How is that science? Does coronavirus not survive at 30,000 feet? Is that what it is? No, come on, people. It's politics. And part of the politics was Walmart got to stay open and all of these other small businesses couldn't. So what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to compete? And yeah, hey, I understand you need clothes, right? And you need food. Most Walmarts have both. You might need medicine in order to even survive. So that kind of makes sense. But why Walmart? Why did the government choose Walmart and Target are going to survive? All of you little mom and pop stores that maybe have been multi-generational, where it's your parents and maybe even your grandparents that started the store, started the restaurant. And now all of a sudden there's a lockdown and you cannot be open. It entirely political. And I understand the science behind all of this. I have spent a lot of time studying it. And you might remember, if you listened to me even 15 or 20 years ago, I'm trying to remember when it was, I started talking with scientists about RNA interference, and the cool stuff that was happening with African violets and getting the purple flowers to change to white and all of the stuff they were doing. It's exciting. It's fun. But why did we use politics here? And so many people lost their livelihood. So many people lost their businesses. It's absolutely incredible. And just paying companies basically to stay closed doesn't make sense either. Because now you're pumping more money into the economy, and that's causing inflation because there are not more products or not more vendors. There's not enough competition, so the prices go up. And when there's inflation, how about people who are retired, who have saved some money, and now their money is worth what? The inflation rates are, again, it's a hidden tax, but it's really hard on retirees. Because their money that they've saved, they're getting a pittance. You put it in a savings account, you're making a fraction of 1%. And yet we're seeing inflation rates on things like fuel being almost 100%. Think about what it was like in 2019, what the gas prices were. It is insane. So small businesses have to be supported. They are the backbone. They are the innovators. Walmart didn't start as a big company. They started very small. He innovated. His claim to fame, good old Sam Walton, was let's go ahead and have the best prices and anywhere. And so they got the best prices by beating up their suppliers, etc. But it all worked. And Walmart raised, it's demonstrable, again, through real science, that they raise the standard of living in every community they opened a store. It's absolutely phenomenal. But Walmart stopped innovating a long time ago. Now, again, the innovations come just like they do in the tech world, typically not from the existing companies. Facebook isn't innovating. They bought WhatsApp. They bought so much of the technology they're using to drive their company. Oculus, you look at it, right? That's their future, according to, of course, Mr. Mark. But what did it come from? What was the cost? They buy their competition. So I want to encourage everybody to really try and go out of your way, try and shop at these small places. There are, in so many of these malls nowadays, local stores where they've got together and they're running a co-op, or where someone's managing it, buying product from local craftsmen, really, that everything from these women that are knitting doilies all the way on out through very cool black ironwork, things that you can find there that maybe you can find on Amazon. Maybe they come from China. Maybe they're locally sourced, not very likely. But it's been a very tough time here for so many of these industries. One of the things that I did talk about this week on one of my radio appearances is this TikTok live shopping. If you haven't heard of TikTok, is this short form video site. And it started by people saying, okay, with this song, use that song to make a funny little 30-second video. And 20-second. And that's what people did. And it was really quite cool to see. There's some innovative people out there. TikTok has a lot of iShare nowadays, way more popular amongst the younger people than Facebook has become something for the older people. But what TikTok is now doing is providing live shopping. And this is an innovation that really started in China, which of course is where TikTok is located. But in 2020, there was a survey done that found that 2/3 of Chinese consumers said that they bought products via live stream in the past year. So what's live stream? I want you to think about QVC, online or television shopping. Those channels, those infomercials that come on at night, but particularly the channels that are constantly selling stuff. Like Mike Rowe did a little bit of that at one point in time, right? His interview was he came in and the guy who was interviewing him held up a pencil and said, okay, sell me this pencil. And so Mike Rowe went on and on for 10 minutes or more just talking about the pencil and everything related to the pencil and what a great quality it was. Although, of course, he didn't know anything about it. And that's part of what bothers me about some of these things, right? These people are just making stuff up. But TikTok Live now is allowing you to go ahead and make funny little things, gain an audience. Maybe they're not funny. Maybe they're just informative. Have them inserted into people's streams and then sell it right there. In fact, instant purchasing of a featured product during a live stream. And then obviously audience participation. They got chat functions, reaction buttons. This is what's coming our way. And so all of you small businesses out there, I really want to encourage you, pay attention to social media. This is the sort of thing that you can do. You can target your local area, which is where most small businesses operate, right? It's in your town. It's maybe a 10, 20-mile radius, depending on what you're doing, what you're selling. And you can micro-target nowadays. That's the joy. That's the beauty of the online world. Micro-targeting. Hey, and if you're interested, let me know. We can talk a lot more about this because I have studied this for years now. Hey, stick around. CraigPeterson.com online. So while you're shopping online, what are some of the things you should do or look out for? I've got a few ideas. I'm going to tell you what I do, and it has worked wonders for me. So here we go. When you're shopping online, there are some obvious tips. So just run through them very quickly because I think you guys being the best and the brightest really know these things. So just very quickly, make sure your security's up to date. Make sure that everything is patched up the way that it should be, that you have some really great anti-malware, hopefully advanced anti-malware, but apply any updates before you start doing shopping because this is a bad time of year to lose your personal information and to have your money stolen. Number 2, if you're seeing an email or you're seeing a deal that really looks too good to be true, take caution here. Do you see a place, I got 5 brand new Sony PlayStation 5s for sale. You might not want to buy those, right? It reminds you of Jeff Foxworthy, here is your sign. So be careful about that. Criminals are really taking advantage of consumers who, life's been tough. Money's been tight. You're trying to find a deal. So be careful about that, okay? Coupons are another way the bad guys have been trying to get consumers to compromise their own cybersecurity. Okay, 12% of emails out there are considered to be spam emails. I think it's more like 80% or 90%. But then I've had the same email address for 30 years. Okay, so don't click on links. Be sure you shop on the real website and apply coupons there by manually typing out the code. So, for instance, if let's say you use .go for your search engine, which you should be using for most cases, most searches, .go says, okay, let me see, where coupons? Here you go. Here's a site that has a lot of coupons. Be careful about those sites because some of them are trying to lure you in. Are the websites you're going to the real ones? Are they the legit ones? Are you clicking a link in your email in order to get to that sale site? Double check. Because what they're doing is using some of these URLs that aren't, and we see those all of the time. They'll have a misspelling of the business name, or they'll do something else. So they might have amazon.badguys.com. And you go, oh, okay, Amazon. I say, okay, it's Amazon. Obviously, they wouldn't say bad guys. But yeah, that's what they're doing. So be careful. So once you're on a website, look for that little padlock that's to the side, click on it, and double check to make sure that it is legit, because they might have what's called a secure server. They might have a certificate that's valid for the site that you just went to, but it's not the certificate for Amazon or Walmart or Target or whatever, joesclothing.com. It might be something entirely different, so be careful, okay? Is what you're looking at an ad? Because there are a lot of fake advertisements out there that look like they got great deals, and even though Black Friday has come and gone, they're going to continue to do this through the end of the year and beyond, okay? So rather than clicking on the ad, just type in the retailer's information, because some of these ads that are showing up are, in fact, almost every last one of them is coming from what's called an ad network. So that ad network is where people go and buy ads, and they say, hey, I want to retarget people that were at this site or clicked on this link, etc., etc. And now, if you are a bad guy, all you have to do is sneak into one of those big ad networks, and all of a sudden your bad guy ads are showing up everywhere. So you see a great ad for a Chromebook, for instance. We've talked about those before. You can just go ahead, okay, Chromebook, no problem. Wow, yeah. Type it in. If the ad's for a Chromebook from Walmart, just type in walmart.com. Okay, avoid clicking on ads. Isn't it terrible how bad it's gotten? Man, I liked the internet better back in the 1980s and 90s. How should you pay? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Public Wi-Fi is a potential problem. The bad guys will often create fake hotspots, and you are now using their hotspot. Now, this isn't as much of a problem as it used to be, because your visits to most websites nowadays are encrypted. Do you remember that lock I mentioned in the URL? That means it is using SSL or TLS, which is a secure communications protocol. So if you're seeing that, you know that you basically have a VPN. You don't have to buy a VPN service. You don't have to use a VPN service. You have a VPN that's being provided by the website you're visiting. And that's really what that lock means. So the public Wi-Fi is less of an issue for the monitoring what you're doing. Although, yeah, they can still do some monitoring. They might play with DNS and things. But they can also scan you, which is the biggest problem from my perspective about using public Wi-Fi. And never share your personal data if you can avoid it. One of the things we're going to be covering in the upcoming boot camps and workshops is using fake or alternate email addresses. I do it all of the time. That's why I have 3,000, yes, you heard it right, different logins right now in use, active use in my password manager, at least over the last decade. So I've accumulated a lot of them. So I use a different email address pretty much all of the time. And I'll explain how to do that in the boot camps and workshops that are coming up. So keep an eye out on my weekly emails. Again, craigpeterson.com/subscribe. So you can find out about them. The free ones. I really want to give you guys all of the basics, right? So that's what I'm going to be doing. Anyways, how should I pay? This is maybe the even bigger side of things. It is very rare that I actually put my credit card number in on a website, at least my real credit card number. There's a number of options that are available to you now that weren't before, even if it's not a credit card, even if it's a debit card. And generically, this is known as single-use credit cards. So we've got a few here. I use typically Capital One's ENO, E-N-O. If you have a Capital One card of any sort, this is a little browser plugin that you can put on. Now, the downside of this is they will by default try and look at every web page you visit. So from their perspective, it's worth it because now they get that data from you. However, in all modern browsers, you can restrict when it runs. But what happens is I go to a website, it wants a credit card, and I can pop up that little ENO browser plugin, and now, Todd, I can generate a virtual credit card number that's tied in behind the scenes to my real credit card number. I can even put an expiration date on that credit card number so it can't be used after a certain day. Some of these virtual credit card options even allow you to say, hey, it really is only single use. It can only ever be used once. And that way the bad guys can't run up your credit card bill. Citibank, American Express, JP Morgan, and more have these types of options. And basically any Visa or MasterCard. Look for virtual credit cards from your bank or whoever's providing your credit card. Hey, stick around. You're listening to Craig Peterson, and I'll be right back. We're going to talk a little bit now, since it's getting near the end of the year, about what kind of technology do we think is going to be big next year. And I've got to mention this project my daughter has been working on. It finally hit the ocean. My daughter has been busy. You might know she's been in the maritime industry for quite a while now. And man, when did she graduate? 2008, I think it was. This daughter, and you probably already know, I have 5 daughters, right? 3 sons too, so it's a mix. But she has been working on a ship called the Yara Birkeland. It's over in Norway. And what the ship is doing here is hauling fertilizer. And you think, oh, wow, isn't that exciting? Wow, Craig, I'm so excited for you. It is the world's first autonomous electric ship, period. Okay, cargo ship. And what it is doing ultimately is it's eliminating the need for about 40,000 truck round trips a year. See, what's happening over there in Norway is there's a factory that's located right next to a mine that's making all of this fertilizer, and it needs to be hauled down through some fjords to get to the main shipping depot where it can be loaded onto the big ocean ships. So these trucks are going up and over the mountains alongside the fjords. And this is a ship that's going to take a trip that's about 7.5 nautical miles, so give or take 8 miles, on the water. Now, Norway's doing this in its own waterways, so there's no problem with international rules and regulations about ships here. This is just local, and it loads itself, it drives itself, and it unloads itself. I think that's really cool. And what it does is it plugs itself in when it is on either port. Now, we've seen this with some ships, right? You might have been on some of these ferries that are electric. It works pretty well for electric ferries because they're usually short haul. They connect up to shore power and they do a rapid charge and they're ready for the next leg of their ship while they are busy taking all of their load in, right? It makes sense, and you might have done it. But this is different. And a lot of the incidents that happen in shipping are due to human error. Think about all of the problems we've had with Navy ships even running into things, human error. And a lot of that's due to fatigue. On the ships, I don't know if you know it, I have 2 kids, three actually, that have been in the maritime industry, the big maritime industry, and they take 4-hour shifts. So 4 on, 4 off, 4 on, 4 off every day. So fatigue is a very big deal for a lot of the shipping industry. And for the first few years, they're planning on having this ship be crewed. They're going to be up, of course, on the bridge, monitoring everything, because you got a problem with artificial intelligence, machine learning. If a big ship is coming along and there's a kayak in the way, it's actually the kayak's job to get out of the way. But if you run over a kayaker, things aren't going to go very well for you, frankly. But how does a computer recognize a kayak from maybe marine life or even some sort of a swell that's out there? So they think they've got most of this solved. And this is the project that my daughter's been working on for a few years here. She's a mariner. She has her captain's license, unlimited tonnage, unlimited vessels, unlimited waterways anywhere in the world. It's just incredible, all of the stuff she's done. So the wheelhouse could disappear altogether, but they've got to make sure that everything is working pretty darn well, okay? Large vessels can't do anything about the kayak. All they can do is warn, but they definitely can't maneuver. And that's why the deep draft vessels have priority over sailboats or pretty much anything else that's out there. And what that brings up is the fact that we don't have the regulations yet for these autonomous ships. We don't have the regulations yet for autonomous cars, right? This is normal. The technology tends to precede the regulations. And we have regulations in place right now for autonomous vehicles in certain areas, but they're nowhere near mature. It's going to take a while before everything is all figured out. Now, that is leading us into our friends at Ford. Ford's done a couple of interesting announcements over the last couple of weeks, so I have to bring these up. In an effort really to deal with this ongoing chip shortage, Ford has made a deal with Global Foundries. Global Foundries is a chip maker, and they have a non-binding agreement. Now, that makes it interesting. If it's non-binding, why even bother? But the press release says it's opening the door for Global Foundries to deliver more chips to Ford in the short term. But what's happening right now, because of the chip shortages, companies are designing their own purpose-built chips rather than relying on the general purpose chips made by Intel or AMD, Qualcomm, Samsung, NVIDIA, MediaTek, depending on what kind of chips we're talking about. This is fascinating because it is hurting Intel, no question about it, and AMD. So what has Intel done? Intel is moving its stance to being more of a contracted chip manufacturer. So you can go to Intel and say, here's my chip design. Go ahead and make that for us, would you? And off they'll go and they will manufacture it. And they will probably even help you with some of the design things. Fascinating. Now, the other thing that's been happening for a while is if you look at Apple, for instance, they have been using their own chips in their iPhones and iPads. Now they also are using their own chips in the laptops and various desktop computers. So Apple is the highest profile example I can think of offhand. that have replaced Intel's chips. That's absolutely amazing. Google has also created its own chip for the latest Pixel phone. So if you buy the latest flagship Pixel, which I would not do because this is the first time they're really using their own chip, but they've got their own chip now in there. Amazon has been deploying its own chips in its internal servers to improve performance, as well as to make it better for the Alexa voice assistant. You see how long tail, that's a marketing term, but really how special, purpose-designed, purpose-built chips are getting. So it's huge. Intel's changing course. They've never been a great chip designer, if you ask me. And if you know my history, I've been down at the chip level. I was down there for many years in the kernel of operating systems and dealing directly with all of the different chips. When you're thinking about drivers and the low end in the operating system, that's what I did for a lot of years. So I'm glad to see this happen. It's going to be better for you because the devices can be cheaper because they don't use a general purpose chip. The chip is built and designed for what it's being used for. So good news there for Ford, because Ford is going to be doing the same sort of thing, I bet. Mark my words. Okay? I didn't get to the predictions for this year, but I will when we get back this upcoming year. Stick around. Of course, you're listening to Craig Peterson. You can get all kinds of information. In fact, if you sign up for my email list, which is not a heavy marketing list, believe me, you'll get a bunch of different special reports, the ones I think are going to help you out the most. CraigPeterson.com. We just talked about the future when it comes to chips and our computers. We're going to continue that discussion right now on artificial intelligence and machine learning. What else is going to be important next year? You just got my basic predictions about what's going to happen with chip manufacturing. These various vendors of various devices are going to continue to move away from Intel, AMD, etc., these general purpose chips, and move more to special purpose chips. Now, there's a number of special purpose type designs that have been out there for a very long time. For instance, ASICs, those of you in the industry know those. I programmed some way back when. They've gotten much more complicated. But for instance, when we're putting in systems for a business, we will typically use Cisco systems that have ASICs so that everything is extremely fast. You don't notice any delay, and yet it can do very heavy-duty filtering, packet examination, stream examination, because it's being done in hardware. That's the advantage to it. So we're going to see more and more of that since Apple's already moved to their own chips. Google has already moved to their own chips, Amazon, their own chips, etc. And there will always be a need for general purpose chips. In fact, you can say that the Apple chips, for instance, are fairly general purpose. They're being used in your iOS devices, your iPhone, your iPad, but they're also being used in desktop applications. But if you look more closely at what Apple's done, it has a couple of different types of CPUs inside the chip. So it has the high-performance CPUs that are only engaged when it needs some serious computing going on. It has the low-power, lower-performance CPUs that are also built into that same chip that now handle background tasks. Things need to be updated that don't need a whole lot of CPU or don't need to be really fast. And then it also has graphics processing units that will handle things like screen updates, moving stuff around on the screens. There is a lot of technology in that chip. In reality, it would used to take three completely different sets of chips to do what the one Apple chip can do. So it is an example of a special purpose CPU. We're going to be seeing more and more of those. Now, as a consumer, you're not really going to notice, other than, wow, this thing's fast, or wow, this battery lasts forever. You're going to have some great functionality. And I think we are seeing, because they're spending about $2 billion a week right now in the industry, you're going to be seeing more of these fabs come online, chip fabrication plants, and they take a long time to build and put up online. But they're going to be making more specialized chips, which I really... There's an article that came out based on a survey from the IEEE. And this is called The Impact of Technology in 2022 and Beyond. Now, these are some global technology leaders. Of course, IEEE was all about electrical engineering back in the day. Today, it's more about general technology. But here's the results. What is important for next year? Now, remember, I don't give investment advice, so don't look at this as things you should be putting your money into. This is just stuff that is good to know and probably should be considered, but this is not, again, investment advice. Technologies will be the most important in 2022. Well, according to this kind of little brain trust, if you will, amongst the respondents, more than 1 in 5 say that AI and machine learning are going to be very important. What's the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning? The lines are blurred nowadays. They used to be a lot more clear. Machine learning used to be the computer learns. Let's say it's working on a factory floor, and it has to do some welding on a joint, and it has sensors, and it learns, oh, okay, this part, when it comes into me, may be here, but it might be there, and it might be here, so I got to move around a little bit. That's basic machine learning. Artificial intelligence, which I think is a superset of machine learning, but other people argue the other way. They don't know what they're talking about. Artificial intelligence is where it doesn't even have to be taught how to learn. It just figures things out. So it's not, when it's built, taught to learn where that piece that it needs to weld is likely going to be and how to find it. It just knows, okay, I'm supposed to weld, so how do I do that? That's much more of an artificial intelligence. So that's number one, artificial intelligence. Next up, cloud computing, 20%. Now, my opinion on cloud computing is not very high, frankly, because cloud is just the name for somebody else's computer. Cloud computing does not mean it's safer. It does not mean that it requires less work on your part. Where I think cloud computing can help a business is where you push overflow to the cloud. Many businesses that have moved technology to the cloud have moved it back now because, frankly, the cloud did not provide them with what they thought they'd get, which is cheaper, better computing. And a lot of the breaches that we're getting nowadays are in the cloud. People's databases being exposed, applications being exposed. It's great for hackers because they know, okay, let me see. Amazon has the majority of all cloud computing in the world, so let's just scan Amazon computers and see what we can find. And they're going to find that this bank has this open, or that company has that database available, et cetera, et cetera. So be careful with that. But they think cloud's number 2. 5G. 17%. That I am very excited about. And here's why. 5G is a generic term for the high-speed wireless data. So think cell phone, basically. But why it really matters is it's designed to handle billions of devices so that you can have a lot of people sharing data, getting to data, sharing a network connection in a densely populated area. That's where it really shines. And then it also has a faster data rate than the older technologies. One of the things you'll find as you compare, if you really dig into the technology, compare the various cell companies, is that, for instance, T-Mobile, which is who I use, has a lower frequency spectrum. Lower frequencies cannot carry as much data, but what they can do, I'm really oversimplifying, but what they can do is more readily pierce glass and brick and walls. So T-Mobile's frequencies are lower than Verizon, for instance. So Verizon can get you faster data, but can't get it into as many places and not as well as T-Mobile. Just really putting this quite simply. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, we had a court order stopping the deployment of these higher frequency 5G networks because of complaints from some people, particularly in the avionics, in the airline industry, where they're saying they could be squashing some of our critical systems because they're using some of the old satellite frequencies for 5G up in the upper bands. Anyhow, one of the things that 5G has already been used for is what I was involved with. I was involved with emergency medicine for a long time, and I was an EMT IPD back in the day, so almost a paramedic. And think about what could happen now. You're in the back of an ambulance. You could be the hands for the doctor who can be seeing the patient as you're driving down the highway, bringing that person in. Because historically, I remember this one woman had placenta previa and had just soaked through some towels with blood. She was in really bad shape. And we were squeezing IVs to get fluid into her. It was incredible. It was something else. And we brought her right in on the gurney emergency room and right up to the operating room and put her on the table right from our ambulance gurney. Well, with 5G, they can be doing that now, not just in an ambulance, but in more rural areas. Doctors can be operating remotely on someone. It's very cool, this whole telemedicine, including remote surgery. It's huge. So these technology leaders agreed with me on that. 24% is the number one most benefit for 5G telemedicine. Number 2, remote learning and education, 20%. Personal, professional, day-to-day communications. Think of all of the stuff we're doing now, how much better that's going to get. Entertainment, sports, live streaming. Manufacturing and assembly, transportation and traffic control, now we're down to 7%. And by the way, that's where the cars are talking to each other. If you have 5G, you don't need a mesh because you can use 5G. Carbon footprint reduction and energy efficiency, that's 5%. And 2% farming and agriculture. Our farming equipment's already using GPS in order to plow fields, plant fields, harvest fields. It's amazing. So there you go. Those are the top pieces of technology that are predicted to influence us next year. I think it's absolutely correct. And I've got to give you a bit of good news here again. 97% of these people polled agree that their teams are working more closely than ever before because of these working from home, workplace technologies and apps for office check-in, etc. Good news all around. Hey, if you want more good news, if you want to know what's happening, even some bad news, I got the right place for you to go. I have 5-minute little trainings in my emails every week. I have boot camps. Again, all of this is the free stuff. Imagine what the paid stuff is. But I want you to understand this.